Imagine a world where the wind simply stops. It's a strange thought because wind is such a constant part of our daily lives. From the cool breezes that provide relief on a hot summer day, to the powerful gusts that turn the blades of wind turbines, wind is more than just air in motion. It's a driving force of life on Earth. But what would really happen if, for one whole year, the planet experienced absolute stillness? Let's dive into the foundations of what wind does for us and why its absence would be catastrophic. Wind isn't just a pleasant or sometimes annoying phenomenon. It's a crucial component of the Earth's climate system. It occurs because of differences in air pressure, created when the sun heats the Earth's surface unevenly. Warm air rises, cooler air rushes in to take its place, and voila, wind is born. This natural movement of air helps distribute heat across the planet, moderating temperatures and preventing extreme conditions in most areas. Without it, regions that are already warm would become unbearably hot, and colder areas would plunge into bitter cold. The movement of wind also drives the water cycle. As air currents pass over bodies of water, they pick up moisture, forming clouds that travel across landscapes to release rain. Without wind, this cycle would grind to a halt. Rain would become irregular, leaving some areas in prolonged drought, while others could experience stagnant, oppressive humidity. This would severely impact agriculture, ecosystems, and even our drinking water supplies. Let's not forget how vital wind is for maintaining air quality. In cities and industrial areas, pollutants in the air are constantly being dispersed and carried away by the wind. In a windless world, these pollutants would settle and linger, creating a toxic atmosphere. This isn't just a hypothetical problem. There are real-life examples. In 1952, London experienced what is now called the Great Smog, where stagnant air trapped pollutants over the city for days, leading to thousands of deaths. Now imagine a similar scenario lasting for an entire year on a global scale. Wind also plays a major role in supporting ecosystems. Seeds, pollen, and spores are carried by the wind, allowing plants to reproduce and ecosystems to thrive. Without wind, the natural spread of plant life would come to a halt, leading to a domino effect across food chains. Birds, insects, and animals that rely on these plants would be affected, potentially triggering massive die-offs. On top of this, wind drives ocean currents. These currents are essential for regulating global temperatures and supporting marine ecosystems. If wind stopped, ocean temperatures would become unbalanced, with warm waters stagnating in some areas and colder waters in others. This would disrupt marine life on an unprecedented scale, affecting everything from coral reefs to the fishing industry. This hypothetical scenario already sounds daunting, and we're just scratching the surface of the changes that a year without wind would bring. It's clear that wind isn't just a backdrop to our lives, it's a critical player in maintaining balance on our planet. In the next part, we'll explore how the absence of wind would begin to disrupt our daily lives and infrastructure within days and weeks, unraveling systems we've built to depend on its presence. As the days turn into weeks without wind, the effects on our daily lives and the systems we rely on would become impossible to ignore. One of the first noticeable changes would be the oppressive stillness in the air. Without even the smallest breeze, cities and towns would feel unnaturally quiet. The absence of background noise like rustling leaves or howling gusts, creating an eerie atmosphere. But this unsettling calm would quickly give way to more serious problems. Temperatures would start to spiral out of control. In urban areas, where concrete and asphalt trap heat, the lack of air circulation would turn cities into virtual ovens during the summer. Without wind to carry cooler air or dissipate heat, temperatures could rise by several degrees, pushing already hot regions into dangerous territory. Heat waves, like the infamous European heat wave of 2003, which claimed tens of thousands of lives, would become more common and prolonged. Vulnerable populations, such as the elderly and those with pre-existing health conditions, would bear the brunt of these extreme conditions. In colder months, the story would flip, especially in regions that depend on wind-driven weather patterns to circulate warmer air. Without wind, frigid temperatures would settle in, creating prolonged and severe cold spells. Heating systems would be pushed to their limits, leading to energy shortages and even blackouts in areas unprepared for such sustained demand. Transportation would face significant hurdles. Wind plays a vital role in air travel, providing the lift airplanes need to fly efficiently and the tailwinds that help reduce fuel consumption. Without wind, flight patterns would need to be completely restructured, increasing travel times and fuel usage dramatically. Turbulence caused by air movement would no longer be an issue, But that small silver lining would pale in comparison to the logistical and economic disruptions in global travel. Oceanic transport would also grind to a near halt. Sailboats and other vessels that rely on wind would become obsolete, and even modern ships, which depend on currents influenced by wind, would face delays and increased fuel consumption. Shipping costs would skyrocket, affecting the global supply chain and driving up the price of goods. Energy production would be another major casualty. Wind power, which accounts for a growing percentage of global electricity, around 7% as of the early 2020s, would disappear entirely. Countries like Denmark and Germany, which rely heavily on wind energy, would experience immediate shortages, while other energy sources like coal, natural gas, and nuclear could temporarily fill the gap. The increased demand would strain these systems, potentially leading to rolling blackouts and widespread outages. Farming and agriculture would face devastating challenges. Wind is crucial for pollination, especially for crops like wheat, corn, and fruit trees. In its absence, farmers would need to turn to manual pollination, an extremely labor-intensive and costly process. Crop yields would plummet, leading to food shortages and skyrocketing prices. Irrigation systems, too, would suffer without wind to help distribute water evenly across fields. These impacts would quickly extend beyond individual cities and countries, becoming a global crisis. Supply chains would break down, access to essential resources like food and fuel would dwindle, and the interconnected nature of the modern world would magnify the fallout. By the end of just a few weeks without wind, society would already be grappling with widespread disruptions. But as the months wore on, the effects would deepen, threatening ecosystems and the very fabric of life on Earth. In the next part, we'll delve into how the absence of wind would ripple through nature, disrupting ecosystems, wildlife, and the delicate balance of life itself. As weeks without wind turn into months, the impact on Earth's ecosystems and wildlife would be devastating. Wind is more than just moving air. It's a critical component of the natural world, influencing how life thrives across land, sea, and sky. Without it, the interconnected balance of ecosystems would unravel, leaving widespread destruction in its wake. One of the most immediate effects would be on plant life. Wind plays a crucial role in spreading seeds, pollen, and spores, allowing plants to reproduce and expand into new areas. Without this natural dispersal mechanism, many plants would struggle to survive. Species that rely heavily on wind for pollination, like grasses, grains, and some trees, would see dramatic declines. This would cascade through the food chain as herbivores that depend on these plants for sustenance would face starvation. Aquatic ecosystems would also suffer. Wind drives the surface currents of oceans and lakes, which are vital for mixing water layers. This mixing helps distribute oxygen and nutrients throughout the water, supporting marine life at all levels. Without wind, these currents would weaken, causing oxygen levels in deeper waters to drop. This process, known as hypoxia, could lead to massive die-offs of fish, shellfish, and other aquatic organisms. Fisheries, which provide a primary source of protein for millions of people worldwide, would collapse, exacerbating food shortages already triggered by agricultural declines. The absence of wind would also disrupt weather patterns, further stressing ecosystems. Rainfall would become more localized and uneven, leading to prolonged droughts in some areas and flooding in others. This would devastate habitats as animals and plants struggle to adapt to the unpredictable conditions. Forests, for instance, would be particularly vulnerable. Without wind to carry moisture-laden air from oceans to land, many regions would see a sharp decline in rainfall, causing forests to wither and increasing the risk of wildfires. Wildlife would face immense challenges in this new, still world. Birds, which often rely on the wind currents to conserve energy during migration, would struggle to complete their long journeys. Many species would abandon their migration routes altogether, disrupting breeding cycles and leading to population declines. Insects, such as bees and butterflies, would also suffer as they use wind cues to navigate and find food. The loss of these critical pollinators would further exacerbate the decline in plant diversity and agricultural output. Even the smallest creatures, like microorganisms, would be affected. Tiny particles and organisms that travel through the air, including beneficial bacteria and fungal spores, would no longer disperse effectively. This would impact soil health, as these organisms play a key role in breaking down organic matter and cycling nutrients. Poor soil quality would further hinder plant growth, creating a vicious cycle of decline. predators, scavengers, and other higher-level animals would feel the ripple effects of these changes. As prey species decline due to habitat loss and food shortages, predators would face starvation. Entire food webs would begin to collapse, leading to extinctions across multiple species. Coastal ecosystems would be particularly hard hit, as the loss of wind-driven upwelling, a process that brings nutrient-rich water to the surface, would disrupt marine food chains, from plankton to top predators like whales. The silence of a windless world would also have psychological effects on humans and animals alike. The rustling of leaves, the whispers of grass, and the distant howl of the wind are constant, comforting background sounds that have existed for as long as life on Earth. Their absence would create an unsettling stillness, amplifying the sense of isolation and vulnerability. As ecosystems falter and wildlife populations plummet, humanity's dependence on the natural world would become starkly apparent. In the final part, we'll explore how the long-term absence of wind would reshape human civilization, altering the course of our future in profound and irreversible ways. As a year without wind stretches into its final months, the consequences for human civilization would become stark and unavoidable. Our way of life, which depends so heavily on wind-driven systems, would be forced into a desperate struggle for adaptation and survival. One of the most immediate challenges would be energy production. Wind power accounts for roughly 7% of global electricity generation, but the effects of a windless world go beyond just renewable energy. Thermal power plants, including coal, gas, and nuclear facilities, rely on cooling towers that depend on air movement to dissipate heat. Without wind, these plants would risk overheating and shutting down, leading to widespread blackouts. Solar energy systems would also face challenges, as the lack of wind could create localized heat pockets that reduce efficiency. With power grids under strain or completely failing, access to electricity would become a luxury, disrupting communication, healthcare, and essential services. Transportation systems would be fundamentally altered. Airplanes, which rely on wind for lift and stability, would face reduced performance or grounding altogether. Shipping would slow dramatically as windless seas make it harder for vessels to move efficiently. The global supply chain, already under pressure from reduced agricultural and industrial productivity, would grind to a halt, leading to shortages of food, medicine, and other vital goods. Communities that rely on imported resources would be hit the hardest, with many descending into crises of scarcity. Economic systems would be in turmoil as industries collapsed. Tourism, an economic lifeline for many regions, would dwindle. Iconic natural landscapes like deserts and forests, whose beauty is often tied to wind-sculpted features, would begin to degrade, leaving once vibrant ecosystems barren and lifeless. Coastal areas, which depend on consistent wind patterns for fishing and recreation, would see their livelihoods vanish. Entire sectors such as wind farming, aviation, and maritime trade would cease to exist, forcing millions into unemployment and poverty. Health crises would escalate further. The air, thick with pollutants that would otherwise be dispersed by the wind, would turn cities into hazardous zones. Chronic respiratory illnesses, heart conditions, and other health problems would rise to unprecedented levels. Hospitals, already overburdened by power shortages and failing supply chains, would struggle to meet the growing demand for care. In some regions, heat waves and extreme cold would exacerbate existing vulnerabilities, leading to mass casualties. The psychological toll on humanity would be profound. The absence of wind would bring about an eerie stillness that many would find unsettling. Gone would be the gentle rustle of leaves or the refreshing breeze on a hot day, sounds and sensations we take for granted. The world would feel oppressively quiet, amplifying feelings of isolation and despair. Social unrest would likely follow as communities grapple with resource shortages, collapsing infrastructures, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. As time passed, adaptation would become the only option. Cities might begin investing in artificial systems to replicate wind's natural functions. Enormous fans or mechanical air circulation systems could be deployed in urban areas to improve air quality and cool buildings. Desalination plants and irrigation systems would have to expand massively to address water shortages caused by altered weather patterns. New technologies such as drone pollinators might help mitigate the collapse of natural pollination. However, these solutions would be expensive, energy-intensive, and available only to the wealthiest nations, deepening the divide between the global rich and poor. Human migration would become a defining feature of this windless year. Coastal communities would retreat inland due to rising sea temperatures and ecosystem collapse. Residents of heat-stricken cities would flee to cooler regions, creating unprecedented waves of climate refugees. Governments would face immense pressure to manage these migrations, leading to geopolitical tensions and conflicts over resources and territory. By the end of the year, the world would look unrecognizably different. Societies would be left grappling with not just the practical consequences of a year without wind, but also the psychological realization of just how much we depend on natural systems we cannot control. This hypothetical scenario highlights the delicate balance that sustains life on Earth, reminding us of the profound interconnectedness of our planet's ecosystems. In the face of such a catastrophic change, humanity's resilience would be tested to its limits. The question is not just whether we could survive, but what kind of world we would emerge into. A humbling reflection on the forces of nature we often take for granted.